Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. It's good to see you. So I want to talk about a really old problem, a 2,000-year-old problem. It's essentially a culture war between so-called paganism and Christianity. We all know our history. We all know this has been going on for a really long time, and it shows up again and again and again. And I want to talk about a bit of its history. I don't want to bore you. I'll share what I think is a somewhat more interesting perspective about its history as to not bore you, and then get into its modern manifestations, because part of this channel is to point out social engineering and kind of reflect on current events or current developments and how to see propaganda, social engineering, how to resist it, and so on. And current events have definitely shown this conflict between so-called paganism and Christianity taking on new heat, new vigor, and it has been catalyzed by certain current events. And first, I want to define the word pagan. It's just a simple Latin word that means country dweller. Basically, it was used by the medieval church to describe the people who were very difficult to convert to Catholicism. It was people who lived out in the country. They didn't live in the major cities or the population centers. In the population centers, there are communications networks, which are basically just people living close to each other, right? Town criers, people hanging out at work, people hanging out at the pub, people just being close together, politicians all around. There's just so much information being spread very, very quickly, very, very short distances, and it's a lot easier to get people to become aware of certain ideas and to spread certain ideas. Living in a population center also comes with much more coercion. There are financial concerns, social concerns, and political concerns, and bureaucratic concerns that overtake your mind when you live in a city. So you can easily threaten people to believe in something. You can financially incentivize people to believe in something. You say, if you don't believe in this new thing, well, you're not going to climb the social hierarchy. You're going to lose your money. You're not going to get hired at this job. All these people who work here, they're all Christians. They all believe in the new thing. You got to be a Christian too if you want this nice job. Otherwise, you're going to be poor. Or if you want to be a politician, well, everybody, trusts a Christian these days. The whole new Christianity thing proves that you're moral and good and hip and progressive and in tune with the new ideas. So you got to be a Christian if you want to, go up the bureaucratic or political hierarchy in a medieval European society. And then the people who lived out in the country, they were hunters and farmers and craftsmen, and their closest neighbor might have been a half-mile away. They are basically just living with their families, and they are not exposed to these communications networks, and therefore they are not exposed to the new ideas, and they are not coerced. They don't have these financial, social, political, or bureaucratic coercions or pressures on them. And so when a missionary comes out and says, you need to believe in this new dogma, they just say, no, I'm good. No thanks. Move along, please. And they are much more difficult to convert. And so this is why pagans became the enemy of the church, because they were just people who were reluctant to convert and were much less ready to cave into social pressures. And they were more independent-minded. We see the same things today. The word pagan, morphed. It no longer refers to the Latin original meaning of just someone who lives out of the city, someone who lives out in the country. Now it means any occultist, parapsychologist, paranormal researcher, a spiritual practitioner, a Satanist, a New Ager. It goes the whole gamut. Even some forms of scientific materialism are labeled as pagan. Like quantum physics gets called paganism. And if you're a Hindu, you're a pagan. If you're a Buddhist, you're a pagan. If you believe in any of those non-Yahweh traditions, the three Yahwehisms, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, if you believe in any other religion, you're a pagan. If you're a Native American shaman, you're a pagan. If you're a Siberian shaman, you're a pagan, right? They just kind of apply it to everything that is non-Christian or non-Yahwehistic. And obviously this is like a ridiculous umbrella term that it's insane to use it, in my opinion, because there are so many different views and so many different beliefs that are categorized as pagan. And for example, like, you can have a neo-pagan, someone who calls themselves a neo-pagan. They're very likely into a lot of Aleister Crowley stuff, maybe into some Wicca, and into some nature worship, and all these things that were sort of developed really no earlier than the 1970s. I know Aleister Crowley goes back to the late 19th, early 20th century, but the sort of neo-pagan ideology that came from the New Age is really not congruent with, like, a pagan traditionalist who doesn't care anything about nature worship or Wicca or any of that crap, yet they'll both be called pagan by outsiders, by Christians. And then an occultist who performs ritual magic or chaos magic or something like that will also be called a pagan, even though a chaos magician who is probably far more liberal in their political ideology will get lumped in with a right-wing pagan imperialist traditionalist by a Christian, because to the Christian they're the same. The Christian doesn't see this diversity of spiritual paths and spiritual traditions and philosophical niches and so on. They all just get called pagan, and it's all satanic or demonic from their point of view. So from my point of view, what I call pagan, I don't like using the term, but to me a pagan is like a traditionalist, imperialist, like Julius Evola, like the Roman Empire. Like, they were the traditional Western pagans, or the Celtic tradition, or the Nordic tradition, or the Slavic traditions, and so on. These are essentially, they believe in hierarchy, social and political hierarchy, cosmic hierarchy. They believe in order. They believe in the family unit. And they believe in sort of natural law and the ways of nature. And more importantly, they are non-dualistic. They see spirit everywhere. They see matter as a form of spirit. And that the spiritual world and the material world are not actually separated. They're really one and the same thing. It's just our human consciousness and human perception can see the material world better. We can interact with it, and the spiritual world is just slightly more unusual or difficult to interact with, but they're really the same thing. Like, if spirit is water, the material world is ice. They're composed of the same thing, but they're just sort of different states. The Christian is dualistic. They believe heaven and earth are separate. This was the main distinction between a right-wing pagan and a so-called right-wing Christian, or just the Christians in general, is that the pagan contention with Christianity, especially today, beginning in the 1920s, well, really the 1880s to 1920s, is when you started to see a resurgence in Western paganism, where they realized that Christianity is what caused all of this modern degeneracy. Liberalism, materialism, atheism, secularism, the separation of church and state, it was all caused by Christianity, because the Christians said heaven and earth are separate, the spiritual world and the physical world are separate, therefore the church will take care of souls and the government will take care of physical bodies and physical needs. And then we had the separation of church and state. The Holy Roman Emperor, for example, now no longer embodies both the high priest and the secular authority rolled into one single person, but he is only the secular authority now. He's only going to deal with politics and the military, and the church will now deal with the salvation of souls, or the care of souls, and it is no longer the emperor's responsibility. This schism occurred in the 1320s. It was between the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. These were two essentially Italian factions, or Holy Roman factions, Germanic and Italian, and they had a civil war where there were people who believed, no, the emperor is the high priest and the political authority. They were the Ghibellines, or the, oh God, brain fart, were they the Guelphs? No, I can't remember. Anyway, one faction was basically anti-Catholic, and the other faction wanted to take spiritual authority into the Catholic Church and leave the secular authority into the emperor and the empire. And of course, the pro-Catholics won, the Pope gained ascendancy in spiritual matters, and the separation of church and state occurred. And the separation caused materialism, because now you have a group of people who are only allowed to deal with the material world. So you have scientists who, as long as they stay in the realm of chemistry and astronomy and matter and physical science and kept their philosophy there, the Catholic Church left them alone. As soon as these scientists started talking about God or spirituality, that's when they got burned at the stake, because the Catholics were like, no, 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 no. You just calculate the stars, look through your abacus, you just mix some chemicals, dissolve some rocks, you stay doing that, and we will deal with the spiritual stuff. As soon as you started having a spiritual or occult philosophy to go along with your science, that's when the Catholics got angry with you. And they forced the separation between science and spirituality, essentially creating atheism. The reaction, of course, was scientists getting angry or hot-headed and trying to claim political power for themselves so that they could study and research in peace without this, big cultural institution breathing down their necks, threatening incarceration, prison, torture, and execution. You also have the Christian ideals of egalitarianism and liberalism basically starting there. You have this religion that believes in universal love and equality, and you no longer have to perform any difficult ascetic spiritual disciplines or any occult spiritual disciplines or self-awareness training or stoicism or anything like that. It's no longer necessary. All you got to do is believe in Jesus and you get saved. You get sent to heaven when you die. So of course the pagans have a serious problem with this. The pagans believe, no, you have to perform heroic action. You need to learn how your mind, body, and emotions work and how to control them so that you can improve yourself as a person. You have to be noble in spirit. You have to be brave and selfless. You have to worry about culture. You have to do things that protect your people. You have to follow the cosmic hierarchy, and that imbues itself in the political hierarchy. And there's an orderliness here. And the Christians are like, no, we believe in egalitarianism. Anybody can be spiritually enlightened as long as you just believe. A pagan says, no, in order to rise up in the political and social hierarchy, you have to prove spiritual excellence and heroism and courage and stoicism and self-knowledge, self-awareness, wisdom, self-control. You prove these things, you gain these aspects, and you train yourself in this way, and you become a leader. To the Christians, this doesn't exist. It began to exist later, in the late medieval era, when Christians had to adapt because it's the natural way of life. We prefer spiritually excellent people to lead us. Why would we want to be led by people with the slave mentality? So the Catholic Church kind of corrected this error, but it's still imbued in their DNA that Christianity really is a religion for slaves and weak people who can't develop self-knowledge or self-control and don't practice really difficult spiritual disciplines. It's like an easy way out kind of spirituality. It's just, this guy died for my sins. I just have to believe in him, and I'm purified just from accepting this idea. And there's no real expiation of your character flaws in that. You just pretend your character flaws are expiated or forgiven, and you don't actually have to do anything about it, right? This is a shortcut. This really is a religion designed for weak, lazy people who are looking for an easy way to gain enlightenment or salvation. And it makes sense that it takes root during Roman decadence, during the Pax Romana, when everything was conquered, the whole world was conquered. And a lot of Romans were like, well, what do we do now? Well, at the height of an imperial state, when you've conquered the whole world, now you're supposed to look to the higher things in life, the cultural and spiritual things, and you're supposed to sort of conquer those invisible mountains, those spiritual mountains. You ascend and transcend the material empire that you built and start to understand its origins in the cosmic hierarchy, and you're supposed to turn toward spiritual matters to then sort of create a spiritual hierarchy or a spiritual empire. And now instead of conquering the earth, you sort of start conquering the higher planes. Unfortunately, throughout human history, this hasn't really happened because it's very difficult to perceive. It's very difficult to accomplish. It's like getting everybody on that page is not an easy task. So what usually happens is people become complacent. They see they've conquered the world and they're like, oh, it's great. We finished. And then they become lazy, decadent, content, corrupt, greedy, and they're born into this power, born into this wealth, and then they kind of fall apart. and they don't want to do the things of spiritual ascent that are required, the asceticism and difficult occult disciplines. And so they become enthralled by foreign ideas, easy way out, hedonism, quick fixes, instant gratification and stuff. And Christianity really is the instant gratification of religions. All you got to do is change your mentality, believe in this, and you're immediately saved. There's nothing you have to actually do here. You don't have to meditate in a cave for 15 years. You don't have to smear your body in ash and take a cold dip in the snow. You don't have to learn how your body works to regulate the energy systems, and you don't have to fundamentally transform your consciousness. You don't need to expand your perceptions of reality. You don't need to do any of that. That stuff could take decades, lifetimes to accomplish. You don't have to do that. You can just have this quick fix, this instant gratification of spirituality. Get right into heaven just by changing the way you think, believing in this guy. So of course, the decadent Romans were taken in by this idea. Much the same way decadent Westerners today, during our collapsing civilization, love quick fixes and instant gratification. It's the same impulse going on. You know, when a society is decaying in its old age, people become more hedonistic and looking for quick gratification and self-gratification. They lose cultural responsibility and turn more toward individualism and less toward their duty for their society at large. And Christianity came in at just the right time to exploit that impulse, that mentality. So another thing to understand is that it uprooted Western traditions. You know, Christianity was the progressivism of its time. It uprooted the Roman tradition, later uprooted the Celtic tradition, after that it uprooted the Nordic tradition, until all, and the Slavic and Nordic tradition kind of at the same time. And all of basically white people's traditions were uprooted by this progressive, liberal-leaning, egalitarian-leaning, alien mind virus from Syria. You know, it was like some fringe race from Syria had some carpenter prophet, some magician who wowed them and started a cult, and this mind virus moved into Europe and exploited Roman decadence to take root, and then uprooted all of our traditions, and was constantly in that progressive movement toward egalitarianism and secularism. It began, at least from the perspective of a right-wing pagan traditionalist, it began with Christianity. All of modern problems began with that. Well, it really began with the Romans' lack of imagination and vision, which allowed this foreign mind virus to take root. And it's been around for so long that now people think Christianity is a Western tradition, which to me is such a tragedy. Like, I can't put the words Christian and tradition together. When I hear people saying we need to return to Christian tradition in order to combat modern decadence, I think that's an oxymoron. It's like saying you're on the Christian right. If you're a Christian, you're on the left. It's the most liberal religion that's ever been invented. There's no way you can be a Christian and be politically right-wing. It makes no sense, especially considering how much Christians love capitalism and money, especially in America. I mean, you're left of center if you have a love of money. You're a capitalist. You're like, come on, what are we talking about here? So to me, there's no such thing as Christian tradition or the Christian right. These are invented words because the Overton window, the window of political acceptability, has been pushed so far to the left that people think Christianity is on the right, when really, at best, it's approaching the center left. The true right would be like a pagan imperialist, someone like Julius Evola, Benito Mussolini if he didn't fall into the Catholic trap, or if he cared more about spirituality instead of just making concessions to the Catholics. People like René Guénon, Giuliano Kremerz, Friedrich Nietzsche, and so on. These are pagan traditionalists, right? Pagan imperialists. This is the actual right wing. And this began making a resurgence in the 1920s, obviously with Julius Evola becoming a famous writer, René Guénon becoming a famous philosopher, Mussolini gaining power, Adolf Hitler gaining power. All of these movements were coming up in Europe. You know, Nietzsche's works being published more widely in the 1920s, being more read and spread in the 1920s and taken more seriously. The deeper spiritual meaning of Nietzsche started to be understood in the 30s and 40s, 20s, 30s, and 40s, whereas Christian philosophy was kind of taking a back seat. Christian writers were not as well read, and obviously we had very far right-wing political movements in Europe that appealed to the population. You know, it was like 88% of Europe supported the fascists and National Socialists. Like, it was normal. It was not some crazy weird aberration. It was like this real resurgence of strict hierarchy and traditionalism as a reaction against like that sort of Weimar Republic idea. The things being supported during the Weimar Republic, which were like things like homosexuality, transgenderism, multiculturalism, communism, capitalism. These things were like loved by Weimar-style Europeans, these very progressive left-leaning Europeans, and the Christians utterly failed to combat those things. And so you had far-right pagans who were like, okay, we can actually combat these things, like, really. And it was, they were largely successful, except for the fact that, of course, America and Russia invaded Europe and destroyed them in 2 world wars and didn't allow the resurgence to occur. This sort of impulse, this historical impulse, scared the hell out of Christians, especially the church leaders, when they saw what was known as the religio depopulata, when the Catholic Church basically was emptied in the early 20th century. It lost all its membership, and people turned toward more traditional pagan traditions, more European traditions, believing that, like, what do I have to do with some dead Jew on a stick? Like, why would I worship a dead Jew on a stick? This has nothing to do with Europe. This has nothing to do with white people. This has nothing to do with me. This is clearly failing to solve our problems. And they turned toward their European traditions, what would be labeled paganism. And so the churches, whether it was Protestant, Catholic, evangelical, or whatever, they became terrified by this. And you can see it in the writings throughout the 20th century, is church leaders being terrified by this resurgence of paganism and the New Age movement and all of this stuff that they hated. It's mostly because it's an old enemy. It's the direct competitor of their political and financial superiority. You know, the church has a lot of, Christians in general have a lot of pull financially and politically. Think of all the think tanks in Washington, D.C. that are these extraordinarily wealthy Christians that are pulling the strings of congressmen and senators and other people in the intelligence community and so on. There's a lot of like really hardline kind of evangelical and Catholic think tanks and Protestant think tanks throughout the D.C. area that have a great deal of power over the policy that's made. And they feel threatened by any sort of competition, right? For people's minds, for people's souls, for money, for political power. The same type of resurgence that was going on roughly 100 years ago is happening again. When you look at the northeastern and northwestern United States, there are more people joining like pagan online groups or meeting in person, like to discuss heterodox or unorthodox, non-Christian spiritual ideas, more traditional Celtic, Nordic, Slavic, Roman, Germanic, Hyperborean, essentially, Aryan, essentially, spiritual ideals, then are going to church. There was a study done, I think, in 2018 that showed, like, in the Pacific Northwest and the northeastern United States, there are more pagans, there are more people meeting in pagan groups online and in person than are going to church. So they're, of course, in the Midwest and the South, obviously those are totally dominated by Christians. So I'm really just talking about the Northwest and Northeast. However, political consciousness really comes from the Northwest and the Northeast of the United States. It's sort of where policy is set. And so if you see this, that since, the 1960s, 1970s, people have been turning more and more and more toward paganism, it's going to start ringing alarm bells in the in the church leaders' minds, where they have to do something about it. They're losing, right? And when this study was done in 2018, you can see a resurgence of Christian fear-mongering, a lot of like, oh my God, this is an apocalyptic war. There are so many Satanists and demon worshippers in America, all these people who are into the occult. You know, to them the word occult is like a slur, it's an evil thing. When to me, occultism is a synonym with spirituality. Occult just means invisible. You know, like meditating, gaining self-awareness, this is occultism. Stoicism, self-control, knowing how your mind works, knowing how your emotions work, knowing how your life force energy works, learning how to use it, improve it, control it. This is occultism, aka spiritual discipline. But of course, you use the word occult in the spiritual circles, and to them, it's a synonym with Satanism. And so when they see that, you know, there are more Druids in New England than there are Catholics, or there are more chaos magicians in Seattle than there are Protestants, you know, they start getting really worried that their political and financial power is under threat. Their grasp over our minds is under threat. The same sort of thing that happened, you know, with the founding of the United States. Our country as it is today was founded by all sorts of weirdos. It's why people came to the United States. They got kicked out of Europe for being freaking weirdos. They were in like all these cults and pagan groups and heterodox spiritual groups, non-Christian spiritual groups, or just non-Catholic, weird, mystic Christian groups, and just very strange people who thought for themselves, wanted to think for themselves, and they all got kicked out of Europe and came to America. And there are all these disparate groups and cults all over the United States, all over the colonies, and they believed in all sorts of different things. And those were really the first people who created what we now know as the United States. But by the 1570s, they realized, oh, there's a Protestant church now who is anti-Catholic. Maybe we can get back into the European fold. And a lot of these different cults and groups in America decided, let's ally ourselves with these Protestants because they're anti-Catholic. Maybe this is a way we can reconnect with Europe. Maybe it'll be good. If they're against the Catholic Church, it might be okay. And so more and more people became Christian in the Protestant sense in the United States. And this was a victory for Christians because all that pagan stuff started to get suppressed again. And of course, the Spanish colonized the South straight up with Catholicism. And so you had Catholicism in the South and you had Protestantism in the North. And this is where people get the idea that America is a Christian nation, which is, of course, nonsense. The Spanish colonies were Catholic, sure, but the northern colonies, the sort of Dutch, English, Irish settlers and whatnot, Germanic settlers, they were all sorts of weird things. They had all kinds of beliefs. They didn't become Christian until, you know, the late 16th to late 18th centuries is when the North became Christianized, Protestantized, essentially. And the same thing kind of happened with the Scandinavian countries and northern Russia, is that it's like the further north you are, the less Christian you are. The northern territories in Europe weren't fully Christianized until like the 15th century. You know, they were really late to the game. A lot of Norwegians and Russians have only been Christians for 500 to 800 years, not like Italians who've been Christians for 1700 years. So this short term that Northern Americans and Northern Europeans have been Christians means that the Christian idea is easier to shake off. The brainwashing and indoctrination of believing in this new religion is not as strong. It's not as generational. It doesn't go back as far in the people who live further to the north, and so it's easier to get rid of. And you can see that. The further north you are in the US, the fewer Christians and more pagans you are. The farther north in Europe, the fewer Christians and more pagans there are. And you can see a resurgence of pagan temples being built in places like Norway and Iceland and so on. And this, again, is seen as a threat to Christendom, to, you know, they try to make it seem like it's a threat to Western civilization. These Christians like to pretend that the West is Christian, which nothing could be further from the truth. Christianity, like my position on Christianity is that it's a foreign mind virus. Again, what do I have to do as a man of half Western, half Slavic, full-on Aryan descent? What do I have to do with a dead Jew on a stick who was oppressed by some Egyptians and Romans? Like, that's that's got nothing to do with me. I was those Romans. Like, I don't care about this guy. Like, no offense, but honestly, I'm asking honestly, what does it have to do with me? I don't believe in this whole idea of a universal Messiah from a humanistic point of view, that like some carpenter from Syria. This brings me to the idea that it's a solar spirituality that is true. Our Western tradition is a solar tradition. We see the same figures mythologized throughout history. Like Jesus is the same as Osiris, is the same as Horus, is the same as Balder, is the same as Odin, is the same as Zoroaster, is the same as Tammuz, is the same as Isus of the Celtic tradition. These are all solar entities. They all represent the solar logos, who had 12 apostles, who were all crucified, who went to the underworld for 3 days or 3 months, and then were all resurrected at the equinoxes, and so on and so forth. The pattern shows up again and again, and it's just this idea of the sun and the spirit behind the sun. The 12 apostles being the 12 signs of the zodiac, and so on. And the dying on the cross, you have the verizon of the equinox and the horizon of the sky, the axis of the earth crossing the vertical, and on the solstices, the sun sets there, and right on the cross, right where the horizon and the verizon meet. And it's the shortest day of the year in the winter solstice, and then the sun is resurrected at the spring equinox roughly 3 months later. The symbolism is there. I think if you're watching my channel, you probably already know about this astronomical symbolism hidden within these solar religious traditions. And that's one thing that modern pagans understand, is that the mask that a spiritual tradition wears doesn't matter. Whether you worship Balder or Jesus or Zoroaster or Tammuz or Horus, it doesn't matter, because they all represent the same solar logos. If you want to be saved, or if you want to have a transformation of consciousness, you tune yourself in with the solar logos, right? And that's what's important here. The mask that the solar logos wears in any given culture is not important. It's more important to understand the traditions of your own culture, especially when you don't need to adopt the traditions of anyone else's culture. If you have your own that is complete and sufficient unto itself, why bother with some alien mind virus, some alien religious tradition? It's unnecessary, very likely unnatural and unhelpful to adopt a foreign religion. Why bother? And one thing with these groups that pagans meet in, that are now in the Northwest and Northeast outnumbering the Christian groups, are that they come from all sorts of walks of life, and they follow all sorts of different disciplines and traditions, because they were failed by the church and by the scientific establishment. Science didn't offer any meaning in life, and the church didn't offer any real spiritual disciplines that would result in a fundamental transformation of consciousness. Just a lot of rules and dogma and bullshit. These were people who were like, okay, I have psychic capabilities, I have spiritual inclinations, I want to develop these things, I want to develop my mind, my consciousness, I want to understand what life force is, I want to understand emotions, I want to know how to be a human being, how to be a better human being. And the church is like, well, if you do the meditation and the yoga, that's Satanism, you get opened up to demonic possession. It's like, what are you talking about? I obviously am not going to get help from you people. You obviously are not going to help me expand my consciousness and become a better person. I'm out. Like, fuck you. And so the church utterly failed spiritual seekers, and of course the scientific establishment, being utterly materialistic and the atheistic, essentially failed spiritual seekers, and so they had to make their own way. And we've noticed that, and so when we have these meetings, we have all sorts of different things that we found: Celtic, Slavic, Nordic, Germanic, Roman, whatever, all sorts of different traditions, Siberian shamanism, Native American medicine, spirituality, so many different things, the old Aryan Hinduism and Buddhism and stuff like that. And we find what works, we get rid of what doesn't for ourselves, and we were forced onto a path of individual discovery, individual practice, syncretic practice, like syncretism, meaning taking things from different traditions and finding what works and what doesn't and applying it and sort of creating our own systems of spiritual development and discipline. And we were forced into doing this because we had no other options. The scientists called us like schizophrenic and superstitious and stupid and wasting our time and ignorant and whatever because we were into spirituality and parapsychological stuff. And then we have the Christians on the other side calling us Satanists and possessed by demons and all this just crude, utterly ignorant, horrific bullshit that they wanted to throw at us. And so we were forced to do this on our own. And when the internet came out in the 90s and early 2000s, we found each other. We realized, oh my God, there are fucking millions of us. And so we started communicating and creating online groups. By 2012, those online groups became real meeting places where people were able to meet in person at like people's homes or at rec centers or even sometimes in churches when they have open public things, community centers, places like that. And we started meeting together and sharing our ideas, and we accept all of the different spiritual disciplines and traditions that every person has adopted because we understand that it's an individual process. But we all have like the same kind of idea for the direction of society. We want people to be happy, healthy, spiritually active, healthy family lives, healthy relationships, healthy environment, healthy nature. We understand the problems of capitalism, that we need a much more ethical economic system that meets our material needs. We understand traditionalism. When there are serious cultural problems that come up and the traditionalists come together to try and solve these problems or discuss them, whether they're in community groups or political town hall meetings or whatever, salons, parties, wherever we meet, taverns and so on, wherever people want to meet and discuss these things, online forums and whatnot. Well, you have pagan traditionalists and Christians that come together in these same places because we sort of see the problems in similar ways. There's like a lot of degeneracy in the modern world, ugly art, promiscuity, perversions of all kinds, confusion, anti-spirituality. There's a lot of stuff that pagans and traditions agree on and notice that are problems, and we're on the same page about that. But then there's been bickering and fighting since the 1920s about how to solve these problems. The other way we see in the same way is that it is a spiritual problem. The Christians and the pagans know that all of the problems of the modern world, our economic problems, political problems, cultural problems, problems of degeneracy, and so on, are because we lack a solid spiritual core to our culture. We've turned our backs on the spiritual core. And the bickering comes in is because the pagans blame the Christians for it. Like I said, the separation of church and state created this, the egalitarianism of Christian belief, the universal love of Christian belief, this that sort of weakness, the weaknesses of Christianity are what cause this problem. And then the Christians want to blame Satan or whatever they want to blame for, they have various perspectives on it, and they think that turning toward syncretic spiritual disciplines, or what they would call paganism, is a mistake because they think it's all demonic and evil, and they think only Jesus saves and all that stuff. So they want everyone to believe in Jesus. The pagans just want you to believe in something. What you need to do is just search within yourself, find your connection to the higher spiritual source, and whatever works, works. And the pagans don't care what it is, but the Christians continuously attack them. And the pagans are not innocent either in this, because like I said, the pagans love to blame the Christians. And I kind of lean that way too. I see where these pagan traditionalists come from, and that Christianity is a religion for weak people and has utterly failed us in solving these problems. But I don't need people to agree with me on my spiritual beliefs or anything like that. I don't require agreement in this regard, and most pagans don't. We just want you to search within yourself and find out what makes you a good person, what tunes you in to the higher spiritual impulses. Whatever it is, whatever works for you, that's good. I don't care what it is. If you are able to look within yourself so you can understand how your mind works, how your emotions work, how your body works, how your life force energy works, how you can improve and control those things, how you can be healthier in these ways, and physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual ways, improve all of these aspects of your health, and be a creative, beneficial aspect of our culture. we do not care what the specifics of that are, as long as that fundamental goal is met. The Christians don't think this way, at least by and large. They want you to believe in Jesus. And they will force out the pagans from these political discussion groups, these cultural and political discussion groups. And so, again, we get thrown out. Whereas the pagans, in my opinion, at least the ones that I know, and the way that I engage with this cultural problem, is that we're more accepting of Christians than Christians are of us. We see good Christians, it's like, okay, if this foreign mind virus worked for you, it made you a good person, it really helped you, and you're a good, creative, cultural asset here to the West, okay, Christianity worked for you. Fan-fucking-tastic. Keep it up. You're doing great. I'm going to have my opinions about Christianity and the church and the religion and everything and its history, but it seems to have made you a good person, so that is absolutely fantastic. I will encourage you to continue in that belief and in whatever system of disciplines has helped you to do what you do, to become an emotionally controlled, beneficial human being. I don't care that you're a Christian. We don't get the same respect from the Christians. They demonize us. It's really a one-way street. We want it to be a two-way street, but it's really, really difficult. Because Christians believe they are Western civilization. Right, this is what brought me onto this topic, is they believe Western civilization is Christian civilization, and Christian civilization is Western civilization. They really believe that they invented the idea of family values. They say before Christianity there were no family values. They think everyone was just like in this promiscuous orgy of blood and jizz before Jesus showed up. It's utter arrogance and a complete misrepresentation of history. The idea of a family unit goes back probably 3.5 million years, long before the carpenter felt the full extent of carpentry and was killed by his own profession. The idea of family, like, just study Taoism and Confucianism. You have the idea of a man and a woman raising a child. This is the microcosm, and that the order of that, the hierarchy of the family unit, becomes the order and hierarchy of the neighborhood, which is the order and hierarchy of the municipality, which is the order and hierarchy of the kingdom, which is the order and the hierarchy of the empire, which is the order and hierarchy of the cosmos itself. And it starts with a well-ordered family unit. The Europeans believed that as well. That goes all the way back to the Vikings and the Slavs and the Celts. They all had, okay, you have a healthy man and a healthy woman, and they come together and create a family, and there's a hierarchy, and people know how to interact with each other and have healthy, beneficial, creative, productive relationships, and we know what we have to do in order to make this work, and it's a well-ordered family unit, and we're loyal to each other, and we protect each other, provide for each other, provide emotional security for each other, spiritual upliftment for each other, protect each other from evils, and so on and so forth. That goes back way before Christianity, but Christians like to think that they have a monopoly on the concept of family values. And they think pagans don't understand family values. Hello. We invented that shit when we were still wearing animal skins. Like, come on, guys. Like, don't misrepresent us. Don't have these historical, like, this nonsense based on medieval scribes who just wanted to demonize the Vikings because they were scared of them. Like, let's not be foolish. So that's why I can't take the idea of Christian traditionalism seriously, because traditionalism is traditionalism. It's got nothing to do with your religion. It's how you interact with reality and other people. That determines whether you're a traditionalist or not. It doesn't matter if you're a Christian or a Viking. If you believe in a cosmic hierarchy and cosmic order, and you order your life accordingly, following that natural law and natural hierarchy, you're a traditionalist. That's it. And as pagans, we will align ourselves with anyone who follows that. As, right-wing traditionalist pagans, so-called pagan imperialists, as long as a cultural group or political impulse or policy is a step in that right direction, we will make these political compromises, which is why pagans tolerate Christians, because we can see, okay, you believe in family values. We will allow, like, you want to write some new policy for the government, we're not going to fight you. It's a step in the right direction. I don't agree with maybe 65% of what you're talking about, 65% of what this policy is, but there's a good 35% there, which is very good, and I will make that compromise. I won't fight you Christian think tanks and Christian politicians, because you're taking baby steps in the right direction, sure, we can work together to that extent. But the Christians do not offer us the same courtesy. They won't hear it. They're so terrified of us. And this brings me to, Lucas Miles, his new book, Pagan Threat, has that foreword by Charlie Kirk, right? This book called Pagan Threat, which was published right after the Charlie Kirk event. Now, there's all sorts of theories about the Charlie Kirk event, whether it really happened or not. It could have been a hologram. It could have been a staged event with blood packs. I don't know. But there's a lot of evidence to suggest it wasn't real, that it never happened. It's a point of social engineering. Or maybe it did happen, whatever. But judge a tree by the fruit it bears. Not all I care about, but what is most important to me is the after effects, how it affects people after it happened. How does it affect people's minds? What's the social engineering game here? And it's being used by the so-called Christian right, which are really just mega churches and Christian think tanks and people who want to be traditionalists and see Christianity as the only recourse to being against the left. And it's being used to try and get Christian converts, because they see the turn away from Christianity that's happening right now and the resurgence of paganism, like the 1920s and 30s again. They see right-wing paganism becoming more and more popular. The Christians don't like that, especially the church leaders, because the more people that turn away from the church, the less money they get. The fewer tithes they're going to get that Sunday. You know what I mean? The less political influence they're going to have, the less power their think tanks will have over congressmen. Perhaps congressmen are turning more toward pagan right-wing stuff and less toward Christianity, and so these think tanks will not have influence over these congressmen anymore. All that sort of thing. They see this pagan resurgence that is a direct threat to their political and financial power. And they want to, once again, lump all pagans together, claim that, the Silicon Valley technocrats are pagans because they're into, weird techno-Satanism. And that's true. There are a lot of technocrats in Silicon Valley who are into, the dark arts and stuff like that. Of course that's true. I've got videos on that stuff. And I've been researching that stuff since I was a kid. And they're going to lump me in with that because I like to meditate and perform self-awareness training and crap like that. And I have unconventional heterodox spiritual disciplines. They're going to claim I'm the same as some Silicon Valley technologist who's trying to summon demons into his computer processors. It's insane how they lump us all together. But they want to, because the only thing they care about is that we are all non-Christian. That's the point that they care about. They don't care about the nuance. They don't care that some of us might even be kind of on the same side as them or trying to help in the same direction. Doesn't matter. They just want to tithe you every Sunday. They want you to stay capitalist, because as long as you are out there earning money, they can take it from you. They believe work is a virtue. Why do church leaders tell you work is a virtue? This Protestant ethic, this Protestant work ethic. Well, because they can take money from you. They're going to tell you to have children, yet these guys are childless priests. They're going to tell you should all become workers and make lots of money. While they don't work, they just sit in their churches taking money from you in the form of tithes and donations. It's well, of course they want you to have kids and make money and support capitalism and classical liberalism, because it allows them to live a lazy life where they just take your money. So they're not going to say anything against capitalism, even though it's extremely unethical, causing all sorts of poverty, disease, and mental illness and conflict in our culture. But they're going to pretend that capitalism and communism are different and that capitalism is better. Well, newsflash, capitalism and communism are the same thing, and they're both evil. And a right-wing pagan understands this. This is why fascism and National Socialism existed, and it was part of the pagan resurgence. They were more anti-capitalist than the communists. The right-wing Europeans of the 20th century were ready to absolutely destroy the economic system and replace it with an ethical economic system that made sure the citizens of their countries were well taken care of. Show me a Christian who's an anti-capitalist in America. Show me one. And I'm not gonna, and don't show me the communist Christians who say Jesus was a communist. Because like I said, my position is that capitalism and communism are the same system. They support each other mutually. And so they need converts. And so they're using this Kirk event to scare the crap out of people who are on the fence, people who are seeking spirituality but are perhaps amateurish at it. And there's nothing wrong with that, or immature in it. Nothing wrong with that. We all start somewhere. And they're seeking spiritual fulfillment. A lot of people are realizing the materialistic scientific establishment has failed us. We get no meaning in life from that. And the churches are failing us because they just yell at me about hell and gay people. And like that, this has no bearing on my cultural life. So like, I need to transform my consciousness. I need to look within myself. I need to cure my depression. I need to cure my anger issues. I need to develop my psychic capabilities. I need to do all these things that the church says are Satanism. So like, I can't get help from them. And they start looking for alternatives. And they're kind of on this fence of what should I look for, where should I go, I don't know what to do, I feel on my own, and blah, blah, blah. And then that's when the social engineers step in and scare them back into the church, or scare them toward Christianity, promising, you know, like, oh, look at all those evil people that assassinated this guy just because he believed in family values. Oh my gosh. Look at all those scary people out there. Come into the warm and safe bosom of the church and we'll protect you from this madness. And so these immature spiritual seekers who don't know where to go can be frightened into joining the church. They can be socially engineered more easily. People who are in this liminal state between belief systems are more easily socially engineered. Check out my video on liminality and the trickster, and it shows what can happen when you're sort of in between two states, when you're uncertain about your state of consciousness. You can be more easily manipulated. And fear is a great way of ending a liminal state and pushing you into one side or the other or something that will help you feel secure. Because prolonged liminal states are uncomfortable and insecure feeling, and we want to find something that will help us spiritually and psychologically and emotionally as quickly as possible to get the ball rolling, to find some stability in our lives, to make progress on our self-awareness training and our emotional control and stuff like that. It's a desperate situation when you want to find spiritual knowledge. And then when these social engineering events occur, like very traumatic things like watching a man die in front of a crowd, people get frightened and even more insecure, and anyone who's in a liminal state feels even more desperate and even more rushed to find spiritual and emotional solace. And then, of course, these Christians come out with all these books and all these podcasts and all these speaking tours and open new churches as soon as a social engineering event occurred. The weeks and months after this event showed a huge resurgence of Christian propaganda and media outreach and publication. So it's like they played on it real hardcore to try and get converts into their churches while this pagan resurgence is going on. It was like they're trying to stop people from turning toward their European Aryan traditions and move back into the alien mind virus from Syria, because people are trying to move back into their European white traditions, their Western real cultural traditions. And the church sees that as a threat to their power. When we see a kind of cultural conflict like this occurring, I mean, first of all, it's our responsibility to notice that it's really happening. You know, they create enemies, right? They love enemies, the church. The Christians love having a great enemy. I think it was maybe Voltaire or Pascal or someone from that era who said God needs Satan to fill his churches, right? Satan kind of scares people into the church. So when we have like the left, you know, all these cultural Marxists, oh my God, they're so scary. There's this great enemy. They're all under the thrall of Satan. They're promiscuous. They're inverting the polarities. There's homosexuality and transgenderism, and little boys are cutting their dicks off, and it's all this evil. And they say it's like it's the left doing this, and this is our great enemy. And you can see when there are these times of social upheaval and fear, Christians make more money, the churches make more money. Christians want to support their churches as like a bulwark or a combatant against this modern degeneracy. So the Christian church leaders are like, this is great. The Christian think tanks, they get their policies passed a lot easier. They get much more popular support because they see the left as this great satanic enemy. And they love this enemy. So the Christians don't actually want to get rid of this enemy. The Christian leaders make a lot of political power and money from this enemy. And the Christians themselves, they can play their victim card. And you know how people love to play the victim card to feel like they're oppressed because it makes them feel special. Especially if you're a Christian, you love being a martyr. You love being attacked by Satan. You love being attacked by society because it makes you feel important. You get that persecution complex and it makes you feel special. And on the other side, you have these great hero mentalities that like, oh, I'm in this great war of good against evil and I'm a great hero on the side of good. So you can either play the victim or play the hero. You get both. You get a whole wealth of ego stroking from the Christian church. And everybody who has a strong ego wins. They all feel good about being a Christian. It's like this, it's a sick and twisted ego stroke. However, the pagans understand a little bit closer. If you read the pagan political philosophy of the last 150 years, we've proven again and again that the left, communism, transgenderism, transhumanism, all this stuff has always been funded by the wealthy capitalist oligarchs. Communist agitators are funded by the wealthy capitalists. You look at the Rockefeller Institution, the Henry Ford Institution, the Carnegie Institution, the National Endowment for Democracy. All of these heavily funded oligarchic rich people foundations directly fund communist agitators, communist professors, communist universities like the New School for Social Research and the Frankfurt School of the Social Sciences. They're all funded by wealthy American capitalists. And they love communism. Communism is their wrecking ball. They love post-Marxist ideology. It's their wrecking ball. They get to turn traditionalists, people who have deep-rooted ancestry, into rootless atoms who become perfect little worker drones for their corporations. If you have no heritage, no ancestry, because you're a liberal progressive and you think all traditions are evil, you think your ancestors were stupid, you hate everything about the past and you want to progress into the future, well, you have no roots now. Now you're just an atom, an individual, in an ocean of individual atoms. You have no grounding, no roots. Your identity doesn't matter. You can be anything you want at any time you want, to the point where identity is meaningless, and you can do whatever you want. And now you need to find meaning in some way and direction. Well, the only thing you have now is collecting money and hedonism and self-satisfaction and your individual's search for happiness, whatever the hell that means. And this makes you a perfect little corporate slave. You will become a perfect little worker drone for a corporation or a government. And so this is why the oligarchs fund communist, Marxist, post-Marxist, and leftist agitation and ideology, and why all these professors and schools are funded by wealthy American capitalists. The pagans understand this. The pagan writers and political philosophers have been writing about this for 150 years. They say if you want to stop the left, cut off their funding from the rich people. Stop the Rockefeller and Soros Foundation. Stop the Henry Ford Foundation. Make these foundations illegal. Get rid of them. Get rid of USAID. Get rid of the National Endowment for Democracy. Get rid of all this stuff. Because it's the wealthy oligarchs funding this stuff. You don't have to attack the left and say that these are great Satanists and occultists and pagans and oh, they're so evil and this leftist horde of people is so evil and we have to attack the leftist hordes that are washing over our society. It's Gog and Magog unleashed onto the Christian world and it's apocalyptic and all this stuff. No. All you got to do is turn off the money faucet, the leftists stop getting funding, the professors quit their jobs because they have to find new jobs, the universities shut down, the social media and tech companies shut down, the government policymakers and think tanks shut down because they're all getting funding from these rich oligarchs, just a small number of them, and suddenly the left vanishes because it's unreasonable and unfunded. And it will just collapse under its own ridiculousness, under its own unreasonable weight. The left cannot survive without funding from the oligarchs because the leftist ideology has to constantly be reinforced through media, propaganda, academia, and so on, through financial incentive, mostly. And so if you cut off the financial incentive, you cut off leftist ideology, it vanishes, and then the church doesn't have its great Satan anymore. People are generally chiller, people are generally more moral and good, and there's no great Satan, and people realize maybe I don't have to go to church this Sunday. Maybe I'll just make waffles with my kids because the problems of the world aren't that bad. So don't be fooled into thinking the Christians want to solve this problem. They don't. The Christians love this problem. The Christians love Satan more than they love God. I'm convinced of it. Because without Satan, their religion is essentially meaningless. Or at least, at the very least, they don't gain the wealth and political power that they desire to have. Because without a great enemy, their church, like, if you don't have a great enemy, you don't need to be saved from anything, right? Pagans don't believe in salvation. We don't need to be saved from anything. If you want the world to be a better place, you fucking make it a better place. You don't wait for some Messiah to save you. This is the dichotomy. This is the problem with the Christian right and the pagan right, and how and why they can't come to terms with each other, and why they probably never will. And the Christians are losing this battle because paganism is more natural. It's us. Western, European, Aryan, Hyperborean tradition is within our souls already. It's there, just waiting to unfold itself again in a new way for the new world. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to go worship Odin or Shiva. It's going to blossom in a new way that's appropriate for the modern times. I'm not asking you to go back into the past and dig up some old corpse of some old religion. I don't care about that. What I care about is getting in touch with your true spiritual cultural center. And the Christians will use social engineering to prevent you from doing that. And they're going to make you think that it's Satanism or evil or something like that when you're just trying to reach into your own heritage, your own roots, and have roots and not be taken advantage of because you have no roots. So you're going to look for roots in either the godless left and the corporations and the oligarchs and look for money and self-satisfaction in your pursuit of happiness because you're rootless, or you're going to try and find Christian roots because you think, well, Christianity has been in Europe for 1700 years. That's kind of older than, you know, how far back my mind can go, so I'll plant my roots in Catholic traditionalism. And it's like, no, you'll find your roots through your cultural ancestry, through your DNA memory, through looking into yourself. And you don't need to fall prey to this social engineering that's occurring right now, and how these horrible and violent events that occur around us are being used by social engineers to manipulate you into believing things just so that they can maintain their financial and political power over you, because they don't want to cede any of this power to, you know, random ass pagans from Maine. You know what I mean? They're just like afraid of random ass dudes who are further to the right politically than Christians ever will be, and they're afraid of them. The point is the United States, America, it's an early culture. We haven't even been born yet. Our culture, as a cultural organism, is a fetus, right? We feel like we're an appendage of Western civilization, and a lot of Americans call ourselves Western civilization. It's not really true. We are a colony of Western civilization, but as Oscar Wilde said, we're the first culture in history to go from barbarism to decadence without civilization in between. It's because we never had a real culture. We never formed a big cultural oversoul. Cultures are living organisms, and ours hasn't been born yet. It's a fetus being developed. Maybe 1,500 years, 2,000 years from now is when the American culture will finally be born and begin its life cycle. We have like 1,500 or so more years as a developing cultural fetus before we even have a cultural oversoul to express itself as a civilization. And we, as of now, have no idea what American culture will look like, what American civilization will truly be 2,000 years in the future, 2,500 years from now. What is our future is unknown. And so there are forces from all angles trying to develop as the cultural oversoul, as the fetus. What ideas are going to come in from the spiritual world and take shape, are going to express themselves through us. And the Christian religion, all religions, last roughly 2,000 years before they die. Look at any look at any cultural civilization that had its own religious tradition, whether it was the Persians with Zoroaster, the Egyptians who believed in Horus, the Egyptians who believed in Osiris, whatever. Every mainstream religious tradition, every mainstream cultural idea lasts about 1,000 to 2,000 years. 1,800 years is really the mark when you really break it down. Christianity is at its expiration date, and the Christians feel this, they know it, it terrifies them. And they're fighting to remain relevant and to stay alive. And the new American culture that will exist, 2,000 years hence, will very likely not be Christian. It will likely come from our primordial selves. We will develop something new. There will be a spiritual oversoul that develops our culture from some new idea, from some new cultural impulse that comes from the spiritual world. And this is the essence of paganism, is to get in touch with that cultural oversoul, which is forming itself as a fetus, and understand what it wants, what its impulses are, how it wants to express itself through human beings. And you allow your cultural oversoul to imbue your thoughts, to imbue the way you view your reality, to imbue your choices and actions. And you help the cultural oversoul, this real living spiritual organism, to express itself. And these spiritual organisms have a lifespan of roughly 2,000 years. And ours is a fetus. And it's our job to get in touch with that cultural oversoul, to be in tune with it and to allow it to express itself. This is how human beings live the healthiest, most effective lives, when they're in tune with their cultural oversoul. When you try to be in tune with a different cultural oversoul, you become a parasite within your territory, within your country, and you live an unhealthy, miserable life. You will not have true happiness or true health or true spiritual transformation because you are antagonistic within the territory of the cultural oversoul, like literally the geographic territory. And so to get in tune with the cultural oversoul that oversees your geographic territory in which you live, what we can call cultural assimilation on a mundane level, is one of the most important things a human being can do. And this is the essence of a spiritual tradition, of looking within yourself. The more you look within yourself, the more you become in tune with this cultural oversoul. And this cultural oversoul is I'm sorry to break it to you, it's not going to have anything to do with a dead Jew on a stick. Okay? It's going to be something utterly new and utterly different that we don't know yet. And it will have its roots in the primordial traditionalism that humanity has always had, and it will blossom with new superficial layers over it. And that's the most important way in which a person can act. That's how you have the most harmonious relationships, build the best type of government with the best type of policy, with the most ethical type of economy, is when you're in tune with the cultural oversoul and allowing it to express itself through its people. You consider yourself a cell in the organs of this cultural oversoul. As an individual, you are a cell in this body. And that's the real crux of this conflict between so-called paganism and Christians in America. There are easier ways to deal with cultural degeneracy than turning toward things that don't really feel right for you. If you see the cultural degeneracy and civilizational decay occurring around you, and you're in that liminal state of, how do I solve this problem? How do I exist in this world? How do I ride the tiger during this civilizational collapse, during this cultural degeneracy? What do I do? Well, you're easy prey for Christians and New Agers, right? They love people like you because they can turn you on to their ideas and convert you. What you need to do is rely on yourself and look within yourself and come to your own conclusions about this stuff. And I explained the conclusions that I've come to and how difficult it is to navigate these things. And understand that there are people who understand what you're going through and will not force their ideas on you. You can talk to people like me, and we listen with no judgment whatsoever. We are totally open-minded, open-hearted, and open-eared, and we accept your journey for what it is, and we're not trying to get you to believe in anything in particular. We just want to develop a good culture that is rooted in justice and spirituality. And we get attacked from all sides, and we need to learn how to stick together and organize, even if we have many, many, many superficial differences. These differences need to be looked past. We can look past the Christian weaknesses, like I said, but they don't offer us the same courtesy. We're willing to work together to the extent that we share political and cultural and economic goals and want to reorganize society to be more ethical in such ways. But they don't extend the same courtesy back to us. So we need to figure out different ways and different things to do. We need to really understand how our cultural oversoul is taking shape. We need to figure out what it really is and act in accordance with it. And that's a project we're all going to have to be doing for the centuries to come. So let me know your ideas. If you're a Christian, I'm sure you will be unsubscribing. I am sorry, not sorry, but that's life. And, use the comments section to open up these ideas, because I don't know. These are just the things I've noticed. I just don't want you to fall prey to social engineering. That's it. That's my main concern, is for the purity and sovereignty and sanctity of your mind and soul. And don't become prey to ideological predators. So that was a lot, I know. If you watched the whole video, wow, you're a trooper. Thank you so much. I appreciate you hanging out with me. I always love it when you stop by, when you send me emails and comment, even if you disagree with me. I love interacting with you guys. I have such an intelligent audience. It's unbelievable. I'm really blessed to be in contact with you guys and to be able to share my ideas with you and you share them with me. So I hope we can continue to have this discourse. And I meant no offense to anybody, to any Americans or Christians or anything like that, but these are important discussions we need to have. So thanks again for hanging out, and I'll see you next time.